I'm with Mark Rozenberg from Nefesh B Nefesh. Now, Mark, what is Nefesh B Nefesh?
Nefesh B Nefesh is a not-for-profit organization that started about 20 years ago to assist North Americans to move to Israel, to immigrate, to make aliyah.
And what does Nefesh B Nefesh mean?
Nefesh B Nefesh means soul to soul. The name of the organization comes from our founding. About 21 years ago, our CEO and founder was just assistant rabbi in Florida, in South Florida, and he had he thought about living in Israel. It's a conversation with his wife. And unfortunately, in 2000, there was some terrorist activity in Israel, terrorizing citizens and bus bombings and suicide bombers. And Hamas terrorists approached a bus stop where his cousin was. He was 13 years old, and he detonated and killed him. And the news came back to Florida, and the Fast family had a meeting, and he announced that he and his family were going to move to Israel to immigrate. And the idea was that the souls were connected, soul to soul. He was going to come to Israel and replace the soul that was lost to show this connection that Jewish people from around the world have to Israel. And he had that idea for himself, and the more he talked to other people wanted to come. So it turned into this idea of his family to the organization assisting other people coming and giving them the resources to successfully live in Israel.
That's quite a bold move to actually come to a country when you know someone, when you've been directly affected by terrorism.
It's definitely bold, I think, but when you do the research, it wasn't his first time. He had visited and he had connection. He had some family here, obviously, because the family of the victim was here. But, with proper research and you understand what's going on, I think that's one of the fundamentals part of our organization is that we want to give people the resources. So it's not a visit, it's not a vacation. Sometimes people say to me, Mark, tell me about your program. There's not a start date and end date coming. This is about giving people the resources so they can properly, build a life in a place. And therefore, when you slow it down and you go over the logistics, it really can give people the proper decision whether they should move forward or whether there's too much going on here and now's not the time.
And what programs do you run here?
We don't really have, we have a few programs. Our organization is not about a program, it's about attaining citizenship. So it gives people the wherewithal to make decisions, because when you become a citizen of a country, you take on responsibilities. You have to understand what it means with it. So for some people, that's a mandatory army service. It's obviously taxation. You have to understand what laws are going to apply to you. We run a few programs to assist certain professions, whether they're doctors, so they can go through a licensing track. So we have for volunteers, we help people that are going to come and spend a year doing national service to the country. And those are some of the specific programs. Or some people moving to different neighborhoods. They're going to move to the north of Israel, which is less densely populated by English speakers. So we have a program to assist them to make sure that they can understand the resources there and get the assistance they need.
So if someone's thinking about coming to Israel, coming to live in Israel, do they come here through you for a small program to see if the decision is going to be made for them?
No, so that there are lots of programs, organizations that offer people, whether it's Birthright, which is a 10-day visit to Israel, or volunteer programs, internship programs. That is not our organization. That is not Nefesh B Nefesh. There are people who want to come. They want to volunteer on a kibbutz. They want to go. There's a program where you can, volunteer in the army. You can, go to farming. There's lots of programs out there. After those programs, after someone studies abroad, that's what I did in my year in Israel. I went to study at Hebrew University. I was an English major studying at Hebrew University. Then afterwards, you say, if I want to take up citizenship, I really would like to make a leap to become a dual citizen. That's where we come in to make sure that people understand the responsibility and benefits to that process.
Is it a big process making citizenship here?
It is a big process. It's a technical process. There's a lot of paperwork involved in it. If you're becoming a citizen country, they need to verify your identity. So you have to get a lot of paperwork, not just your birth certificate. You got to get your birth certificate authenticated, which is a special apostille process, which can be a headache. You have to get a background check to show you don't have a criminal background. So that process for some people is a huge headache. And they have to go through an interview. The interview takes 6 weeks of review, at least, to get back to it. And then you hopefully can get that process. The process for becoming a citizen in the United States can take about 7 years sometimes for people. So we hope the process, for some people, will take a year, 7 months, 10 months, 12 months for certain families to go through the process. But the hardest process for people is producing the documents. On top of that then you have to figure out, once you're going to get here, where you're going to live, what type of jobs you're going to get. Those are, it's not you get the paperwork, you're going to do it, or you get a job, you're going to come. It's a combination of the technical process, but also the planning.
Do you have to be Jewish to be able to come and make Aliyah here? And how do you prove that you're Jewish? What is the requirements for that?
Sure. To make Aliyah is to become a citizen, so you have to meet the standards for the law of return, which usually means you have Jewish lineage, or one of your parents or grandparents are eligible under the law of return to become a citizen.
That can be any grandparent.
Yes, as long as you can show direct lineage to that grandparent.
What's it like for a Jew who steps off the airplane in Israel for the very first time?
So I'm cautious to answer that question because sometimes people it sets a certain expectation for them. So we have this new wonderful airport that opened up about 15 or so years ago. So now you get off of the sleeve of the airplane and go inside into this air conditioning experience. So people just have a normal experience. Once upon a time, people used to get down onto the tarmac and they would kiss the ground when they would come to Israel as this signature moment that they have arrived. My tip to people who do that is make sure you take your backpack off because you can lean over and get whacked in the head from your backpack. So for many people, it's accumulation of an ideal, of longing, of connection, and coming home. For other people, it feels regular. Just they visited last year and they come again and it feels the same. And they're sometimes let down by that feeling because it just feels like. But I encourage everyone, there's that pause when you have to go in that different passport line. When you get to Ben Gurion or the airport here in Israel, there's a line for visitors and citizens. So you may have always gone to the visitors line, and this is suddenly a saw switch. Oh, I'm a citizen, and you can internalize that to realize that it's a different feeling.
So have you actually personally been through this experience yourself because you're from America?
Yes. So about almost 21 years ago I came. I was 25 at the time. I had finished college. I was a 7th grade English teacher in Washington, D.C. I mentioned I spent a year studying abroad during college, and it was definitely a formative time for me. I used to say it was the best year of my life, and my wife is insulted. So now I say it was one of the best years of my life. So I had this aspiration to come back, and I filled out the paperwork. I did all the running around, and I came, and I arrived here. I came without Nefesh B Nefesh. It was time before Nefesh B Nefesh started, and it was a weird feeling. It was a bold decision coming, and was one of the best decisions of my life. And my anniversary is coming up next week, so I'm thinking about what I'm going to do to celebrate.
Of course, the State of Israel was built upon the dream of Zionism. Is Zionism important?
So it is. I think it's important. I think that understanding that the need for a homeland, the need for a place to be free. I think that Israel's national anthem, which is the Hope, Hatikva, one of his Liot Am Chov Shvi, to be a free nation in our land, and returning that feeling of feeling out of place sometimes, and having the Hebrew language spoken here, and being with a diverse group of people. So Zionism, I think, is that expression of having a national homeland. It is important, but it combines a lot of the feelings of being Jewish and Judaism's values coming together. And I think that's one of the powerful parts about living here, is that you see the values of the nation state are expressing that. You see that sometimes when there's a tragedy around the world, whether it's a hurricane in Haiti or a collapsed building in Turkey, the state of Israel will say, you know what, we have a great rescue team, we're going to send it out there to help people. Or you see that there are Jews in distress in Ukraine, and they're going to say, you know what, they need a refuge, we're going to allow them to come here as refugees, and we're going to give them housing and care for that. I think that's a big part of that Zionist dream, is that we're going to have an organized government that's going to express those Jewish values.
It's been a light to the nations, isn't it?
I think so. We've definitely, sometimes the light is stronger than others. The amount of elections that we've had here, I think, is not necessarily a great light to or you could say it's really great, a democratic process. There's always the cup is half full, empty. But the aspiration is to try to do that. And living here, I feel like it's a laboratory of those values, of what does it mean to be a state. An individual can try and do something, but what's the collective trying to do? So it's hard when you think about the politics. If any of your listeners listen, what they follow the news in Israel, you might get this one story about one incident that happened in the New York Times about it. There's many things happening on many different levels, on a person-to-person level, where people are trying to spread light, trying to spread goodness, trying to fix this world a little bit. And sometimes, as I said, the light is stronger or brighter than other times, but it's an aspiration that we're going to be able to be an example of what a good country can be.
How do you respond to someone who hates Zionism?
It's hard to...
It's almost become a little bit anti-Semitic in some ways, hasn't it?
There definitely is. The question is, why do they hate it? I mean, sometimes people hate things because it's successful. Sometimes people hate things because it's uncomfortable to them. But it's hard. Like, someone might not like America, okay? Do they not like America? Do they not like the American government? Okay, you can say, I don't like what the government's doing. Doesn't mean you hate America or Americans for it. You have to be careful about it. So, because if someone doesn't like Zionism, they don't like the idea that the Jewish people should have their own country, then that is a line where it's anti-Semitic. Okay, it's a sign of saying, wait, there's other Christian countries, there are lots of Muslim countries. Okay, there's a Hindu country, there's places where people feel at home. What is the singular opposition to having a Jewish country that makes you feel comfortable? Whereas you can say, I disagree with the government's policies, or I think the government of Israel is making terrible decisions, or do stupid decisions, or bad decisions, or evil. I can understand there are people in Israel, many people in Israel, who think that this government or the previous government is doing that. That's politics, and the government doesn't always represent the people. But I think Israel has a lot to improve upon, and we have socioeconomic problems. We obviously have a problem with our neighbors that we're trying to hopefully resolve peacefully with and come to terms to understand it. But to single out the example of what Israel is doing, or the state of Israel, or the Jews of Israel doing, as opposed to recognizing that Israel is 80% Jewish. Okay, so when you speak about Israel, you also speak about the 20% of Arab residents, Arab citizens of this country. It's complex, and therefore, what happened last week is that when Islamic Jihad of Gaza is sending rockets, they actually injured a Muslim citizen of Israel who was a victim. So it's complex, and you have to understand the nuanced complexity of it.
We see in the book of Genesis, I will give you this land, and it says it many times. Is Zionism biblical, and is God a Zionist?
It's a great question, Paul. So Zionism is an interesting word. Zionism is a movement that arose in the 19th century to recognize a national connection to the land of Israel. So when you say that, Zionism technically is not biblical because it arose as a term and word in it. Now it's sourced off of the word Zion, Zion, because that was the place that's mentioned in the Bible, and they'll be able to come to as a place that was fought over and sought after. So it has a connection to it. So to answer your question two ways, okay? One is, no, it's not biblical on it. But if you say, is living in Israel or is Zionism a Jewish value, and is it connected to Genesis, it absolutely is connected to it. Because the whole idea of Jewish history is to combine the values as a place that it's grounded in. And that's the idea, and is a beautiful way of understanding it that Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks talks about, is that the idea of the destiny of the Jewish people is in the land of Israel. It's connected, and Abraham, who gets the idea for it outside of Israel, is brought into as that's the place where it's going to be grounded into. It's going to be part of that land together. Now, the Jewish people were exiled, and we've carried that into exile in other countries around the world. But that connection to that land that brought us back, it brought us back after the Babylonian exile, and then the Romans kicked us out. It's connected into that story of the magic of the land of Israel, of Abraham being promised that land, of the values. And I think that that's where it gets complicated for people, because people see Judaism as a religion, okay? Because if you see Judaism practiced outside of the land, it seems comparable to Christianity or Islam. It's, oh, we live here, we have it. When it's actually also a nationality. It really has a nation. And that helps us understand why some people are more religious Jews or less religious Jews, and there's levels of observance, but it doesn't deny their connection to Jewish history, to the past, to the language, their Hebrew, or their ancestors were here. You take an Italian out of Italy and move them to Philadelphia, they'll have Italian pride, and they might still speak Italian, even though they speak English in Philadelphia. They have that connection to that land. So the nationality of Judaism is where that connection, whereas, Zionism is a nationalistic movement that tried to seize political power, and they cloaked it in politics of it, but it's sourced off of those ideas that are mentioned in the Talmud and specifically in the Bible, of that desire to come to the land of Israel. One interesting idea of it is that in Deuteronomy, it mentions many times, and we're reading it now in synagogues all around the world, is this promise that you're going to come to the land, and when you get there, you're going to build this house, you're going to build this sanctuary in the place that I will show you. It doesn't say to come to Jerusalem in Deuteronomy. It says you're going to build this in the place that I will show you. And only as the Bible continues in Yeshua, and for sure as it moves along, and especially when it gets to the story of King David, it comes to the idea that Jerusalem is going to be that destination. That's going to be the place that's sanctified as the capital of the Jewish people, of the Jewish state, and where the Holy Temple is going to be built. So there's an interesting way of thinking about that, is that in a way it was grounding the values as important, and the connection to that land as the centrality of the 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, but it brings us to the idea of the connection of the place to actualize that is going to be in the land of Israel.
So do you see that today as a spiritual battle for Jerusalem and the Temple Mount? Because God promised that's where we're going to build a temple.
It's the epicenter of the idea of that pining for it. And here we have the state of Israel. And just this past week was the 9th of Av, which on the Jewish calendar marks the saddest day on the calendar when both Jewish temples were destroyed. And it's a day of mourning for the Jewish people. It's a day of sadness and reflection on it. And it's interesting, one of the prayers that is said in synagogues is that Jerusalem is destroyed and we don't have it and it's sad. And it talks about, you and I are going to look outside the window here in my office in Jerusalem and say, it's beautiful here in Jerusalem today. There's beautiful buildings and construction. But what is lacking still is this idealized form of the state, the idealized that we have this grace or this cloud of glory that is of God's presence which is the stories we have of the temple. So we still lack that. There's a battle of thought in Israel today of which mountain is more important. Mount Herzl, which is Israel's military cemetery, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, or Har Habayit, the Temple Mount. So yes, nationalism has this idea that we have a state of our own, but the spiritual climax for many people is still this idea of the Temple Mount, and therefore it gives us this aspiration of saying there's a higher calling, there's something that's going to pull us to a better place for it. There are people who actively want to bring it sooner, and then the Temple Mount faithful that want to bring and start building the temple today. Obviously, it's a delicate political situation, and the police say we're not doing that right now. I totally respect that and understand it, and timing is really important for it, but seeing that as an expression of values for people is part of what I think in American terms you say is the Constitution captures the essential values, the freedoms that we have. So it's important that the eyes of Jews around the world, their synagogues face Israel. In Israel, their synagogues face Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, their synagogues face the Temple Mount. It's the central focus of those eyes are on that spot, and that galvanizes people to make sure that our cause is focused in the right direction.
What is Aliyah? What does Aliyah mean?
Aliyah is the Hebrew word for going up. It's a word of movement. It represents this idea that moving to Israel, you're going on a higher physical level because the land of Israel, Jerusalem, is actually on the Judean mountains. But it also captures a spiritual ascension as well, that you hope that you're going to be lifted up on the higher level, which is when you leave Israel, is usually also a yeridah, it means going down. And it usually, for many years, has a negative connotation that you're going down in your holiness or spirituality for it. But it encapsulates not just immigrating, which is what it really means. Aliyah means to immigrate to Israel, but it means it's an ascension. It's immigrating to a place that you believe is on a higher level.
How many people have you brought here to the land?
So I brought myself, so I'll take credit for that. Nefesh B Nefesh as an organization has helped over 70,000 North Americans move here over the past 20 years. We have a plane arriving next week, another 230, and we're expecting over about 2,000 this summer, which is really very exciting. But we really believe in Aliyah of choice. We believe that people should choose when they're going to come and do it the right way. So with good planning so that they're successful and don't have to, unfortunately, leave if they hit their first bump in the road.
So did you charter this plane, and do you go to the airport and meet them off the plane and things like that?
This plane next week is a charter. We had 60 people last week who were passengers on a regular flight, and we just gave them the services they need. But next week we have a whole charter plane, and we have staff that's sending them off in JFK, New York, and we're going to have our staff greet them at the airport, and as they come out, their family and friends are going to welcome them as new citizens in Israel.
So they will go to stay with family and friends and begin to settle, and you will help them in every step of the way?
We'll help them with every step of the way. Most of these people some of them have rented apartments already. Some will go to friends, some will go to Airbnbs, but behind us are all our advisors who are on the phones and emails and WhatsApping with people to make sure that their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted, because it's not just a leap. It's not a leap of faith. It's not a leap of action. They're not heroes. It's a heroic decision, I think, to come. But they've thought about this and they've planned it. They thought about where their jobs are going to be, where their schools are going to be for their kids. Their kids are registered in schools. They know where they're going. So they just got to get off the plane, figure out where they're going to get over their jet lag. And they have a lot of errands to do to get ready as new citizens. They got to set up their health insurance and their bank accounts. And that's where our team really comes in to make sure that all of those errands are done in an efficient manner.
It's a big step, and it must be a very scary step in some ways to leave your country and just come to a land that you don't really know.
So we hope that people know it. 99% of the people who come have had visited before, and every now and then we get a person who's like, I got to do this, and I've done research. But all these people have spent time in Israel. They've made the visit just to make sure. It's heroic. I think it's a big deal. It's definitely remarkable. I think it's a remarkable decision. It's like choosing a college. It's like offering someone to get married. It's an important decision. But for most of the people, it's a combination of an ideal, but also the practicality makes sense for them. They've thought through scenarios of cost-benefit analysis. I also think there's a professor here in Israel, Professor Ruth Wise, who says that immigrants always move to a country where they think their life is going to be better. So you think about some of the stories around the world that that have come. So they're leaving their place because something's going on, and they're going to a place where their life is going to be better. So I think part of what's drawing a lot of people, and they realize, is that not only are they coming for practical reasons, but they see this as a better life for themselves.
Do you see this as part of biblical prophecy? Because the Bible says, I will bring you back from the north and the south and the east and the west. You're helping North America. So are you fulfilling biblical prophecy?
I can't say that I am. My humility will not permit me to say that I am a prophet or a son of a prophet. That spirit of the energy of ingathering of the exiles is a privilege to be a part of, to see the diversity of people. You go down this plane that I mentioned that's leaving next week, next Tuesday, and you walk down and you see the different sizes and shapes and colors of all of the people who are on the plane. It's a humbling and remarkable thing to see all of them face in one direction of coming home. So there's that spirit, there's that energy for it, but it's a very individual decision. And I don't believe in shaming people who choose not to come, and people who are hesitant or have reasons they can't come. We really believe that this is an incredible opportunity to take advantage. Israel is a special place. Anyone who's spent time here usually feels that energy of the diversity of people and the magic of the holidays here. The weather is amazing. The people are great. The food's really wonderful. It has a really great positivity about it. So if you joining that is really something to celebrate, and we hope that it's going to help make this state and the world a better place.
Is anti-Semitism around the world helping people to make that decision to come back here?
I don't think so. I think that history has shown that anti-Semitism is rarely a driver for a majority experience. I think world wars are an exception to it, but most incidents of anti-Semitism cause most people to feel uncomfortable, but usually it calms down and goes back to normal. And to really uproot yourself and to learn a new language or live in a new bureaucracy or go to a supermarket where you don't really recognize many things on it is a drastic change for some people to make. So it makes a big headline of these attacks, and they're horrible, and I condemn them, and I hope they will stop. But I don't see it as a primary move for people to change. It has to be something that you want to stretch you out of your comfort, or have to make you feel really uncomfortable that you're going to say that I don't have it. And some people, right? I don't feel comfortable here anymore, and I want to come. But the majority are coming because they see this as part of their vision for themselves, part of their practical step. That universities here are doing amazing. The job market here is really wonderful for them. The weather is really great. It comes into a lot of those things, but they don't necessarily feel what's happening in Pittsburgh or Los Angeles to really affect them.
Why do you do what you do?
I do what I do because I think, I've mentioned before, I was a teacher. I think I have a giving spirit, and it definitely, the not-for-profit world is something that I definitely enjoy, both being able to pay my bills and feeling good about what I do. And working for an organization that seeks to help people makes me feel fulfilled. And at the end of the day, I don't want to sell cell phones. I mean, nothing against people who are selling cell phones to do it. But I feel as if it's a way to make a difference in people's lives. And my job sometimes is just to connect dots or to solve someone's problems or make sure they have this small piece of information, and everything will be easier. And that makes that, to be able to have that connection, brings me back to why I taught. Sometimes teaching someone that small little information will just open up a door of wisdom. That ability to read, or ability to read people, will give them the keys to life. And I think that for me, I came here, I immigrated, I went through this process, and to make it easier for other people is a great way to help keep that positive vibe going.
What's your prayer for the future of the organization?
First of all, good health for the world. I think that especially after the past 2 years, I hope that we have the continued focus to be able to fulfill our mission. We have a lot. The government gives us a lot of faith. Our partners give us a lot of support to make sure that happens. And sometimes you get distracted, and sometimes other things come up. So we should have the clarity to be able to keep helping more people. And more people comes, it creates a little bit of energy and sometimes a little chaos. So we should be able to have the focus as more and more people come to be just as successful.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more?
nbn.org.il is our website, and we're on social media websites as well. And check us out on Facebook, Instagram, for just to connect with what we do.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much.
All the best.